Hello, 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 and welcome. I'm Sheila Balgobin, known as the Dream Decipherer, and this is Dream Your Life, Live Your Dream Live, where we talk about all things dreams. Now, today I have a special guest with me, and his name is Christian Elliott, and he is a guide with people to help people with their health. I mean, at all levels, not just focusing on one aspect of health, but looking at health is in a holistic way. So we're going to learn a little bit about Christian. He's going to tell us a little bit about his journey. And we're going to be looking at today finding the roots of illness, at whatever level they're occurring, whether it be emotional, physical, mental, spiritual, etc. And looking at what was how that became part of Christian's journey, and tips at the end that can help you perhaps integrate better the various cells that compose you. So, Christian, I'm going to leave the floor to you. Thank you for joining me this morning. And just tell us a little bit about you and your journey towards health.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be with you, and I'd be happy to do so. Yeah, my story of getting into health is probably like a lot of people. It became a need personally of something I needed to look into, and so that for me stuck more as a profession. I didn't even see myself getting into health as my career, but here I am 20 years later, more than that now, I guess, and I'm still talking about it and still discovering new ways to help people heal and really over the years, when you figure out and solve one problem, what you quickly identify is the next one and the next obstacle. And that's just kind of an iterative process of realizing this thing called humans are complex and we get messy and there are interrelated ways as to why we break down. And so my foray into health really was on the physical realm. It was just degenerative joint condition, a shoulder that had been bugging me for about 2 years and wasn't getting better. And I'd been to about a half dozen medical doctors with really no success. I got some anti-inflammatories and different symptoms that went with that. And then they told me I was probably too young for cortisone or surgery and it's tough it out. So I ended up finding a chiropractor of all people who really turned my paradigm of health upside down. He taught me about nutrition. He taught me about the medical industrial complex, the food industrial complex. And so between that and an immune system that just was not functioning, I got sick so easily, probably 4 times a year. I was laid up for a couple of weeks with just an
Oh,
unreasonable amount of symptoms. And so short version, after a couple of years of learning and studying under him, I really got my feet under me. And when you start, like I just graduated, interestingly, from seminary. So I had this theological background. And I'm moving into what I think are going to be my ministry years, and really, health became my ministry. It was an interesting blend of different aspects of wellness coming together right from the get-go. And then over the years, so fast forward, my wife and I had brick and mortar locations for about 9 years. So we ran wellness facilities and we hired chiropractors and acupuncturists, massage therapists, personal trainers, nutritionists, kind of you name it. And the major disciplines in the alternative world, we had those and integrated them. So I saw a lot in those 9 years of what a breadth of a team can do for people. And then on top of that, recognizing that there's this predictable thing called emotions that people have. And there's this excuse loops that we get in, or these fears and these unreasonable, irrational roadblocks, and we become our own bottleneck to health. And so it really forced me into a fascinated look at the human condition and what is it that is predictable about why we get sick. And so often, what I've found in simple version of where I am today is it really, like you said, it's at the intersection of mental, emotional, physical, spiritual. I don't try to separate them anymore. I recognize that we can be poisoning ourselves, not just chemically or nutritionally, but we can be poisoning ourselves mentally and emotionally. And toxic
absolutely.
thinking can wreck our health as much as anything. So now I just work as a health coach just at virtually. And I work with other doctors and coaches, and we just integrate plans to help people really discern what are the roots of this illness. And rather than playing biochemical whack-a-mole, we go after the roots of it, and we try to figure out how do we empower the body to function? How do we unburden it so that it's not bogged down by chemical or mental toxicity or any number of other things? So that's a very quick version of 20 plus years of thinking about health.
Well, it's a. I think with the expression "who feels it knows it" comes to mind here. That it's
Yeah.
when we reach crisis point and the doctors have no answers. I mean, I was thinking while you were reciting that your story that a client that I had in London, actually, that was giving delivering complementary therapies in a homeless facility for men.
Mhm.
And this gentleman had had a business. He injured himself, and his shoulder was bad. And the doctor's solution to his ongoing shoulder pain, we can amputate your arm. I was,
Oh my gosh. Right. Great
I,
idea. Never
yeah.
mind phantom pain.
I couldn't believe it. I mean, and even the guy said, "Yeah, I didn't want to tell you because I knew you'd be furious, furious." I was
Right.
incandescent. I couldn't believe anybody would say something like that. And all I would do, half an hour of passive stretches, and his arm
Right.
was fine. It had full strength. He could grasp things and hold them. I just like, oh my God.
Yeah. Not surprised. Yeah. No, the medical world is so arrogant sometimes or so blind to
Yeah,
healing. They're stuck in a treatment paradigm
yeah.
and they don't have any clue how the body heals itself.
No. And what I think is funny is that they're just starting to catch up to ancient systems of healing, like in Chinese medicine or Ayurveda from India, traditional healing around the world.
Yeah.
That, it's not about what it is or why
Hmm.
it is, it's does it work? And
Yeah.
empirical evidence, even Einstein said, is evidence.
Yeah.
you
Eh,
know?
yeah. You get
So
enough anecdotes together and it's really evidence. It's not anecdotal anymore.
yeah, exactly. But I mean, and this is exactly the problem. And you touched on another thing and talking about that mind body split. And I think we talked about this when we were kind of getting to know each other, that
Hmm.
this mind body split where mental health and physical health have nothing to do with each other came about in the Middle Ages. Now, back in
Hmm.
the Middle Ages, the church ruled, the church rocked. And so whatever they said went. And if you wanted to save your soul and you were an artist, you could do, if you could dissect the body, that was okay. That's what Michelangelo did, but you can't touch the soul. And the soul was thought to dwell here in the head, more or less,
Hmm.
and in the heart.
Yeah.
So, that's where the split came from. And to this day, we treat mental health as being separate from physical health. And how is that possible? I ask you. Are we headless horsemen?
Oh, not even close. And when you fast forward that to the early 1900s and just weaponize it even more, you've got monopolistic, ruthless, Machiavellian Western medicine that basically it's chemistry centric and it's all about patentable things that we can put into the body that tinker with its physiology. And anything else is now unconventional, unscientific, is to be dismissed and not just dismissed, but fought against aggressively, such
Yes.
that the only thing we're left with is this chemistry model of health, which doesn't begin to encompass healing or the human experience or so many other aspects of who we are. And it's where I think, to your point, we're starting to recognize that we've been under this spell for a long time, and it's time to look more broadly at what does it really take to heal. And so that
Mm-hmm.
once you kind of the trance fades away, I'm like a kid in a candy store now. There's so many aspects of wellness and so many ways to get someone well that it's been
Mm-hmm.
more of a fun puzzle the last several years.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I call it being a bit of an alchemist because as a therapist, I would have different tools in my toolbox.
Hmm.
Sometimes people needed to work with color, so you use color therapy. Sometimes it was sound, doing sound healing. Sometimes it was learning to do self healing and teaching them Reiki so that they could work on healing themselves. So I mean, the mixture of treatment modalities, I think, is actually beneficial for everyone involved because everybody is different, and what works for one person is not necessarily going to work for another. So I'm with you on that one. It's like being a kid in a candy store. Ooh, what can I do with this person?
Yeah.
how can I help elicit, a shift so that they're able to affect their healing? Because I don't never, don't like to call myself a healer. I don't heal anybody. People heal themselves. I
Hmm.
facilitate that work, but I don't do it for them. Nobody can do it for them. It's a choice.
Right. Yeah. I think of myself as a teacher, not a healer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So, okay, we've kind of set out the store about what the focus of allopathic medicine, what passes for medicine in most of in the Western world. Now, I would like to kind of look at ways that maybe looking east or looking south, even looking at other ways, other perspectives at looking at the body, the
Hmm.
mind, and even our spirit. Is
Hmm.
with because we're not these one faceted beings. We have various aspects, various selves that
Hmm.
at various levels that need to be attended to. But we'll start body, mind, and spirit. That there's subtle bodies, but we'll start with the grosser ones and look at ways to be able to address some of those issues that come up at those levels. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Well, okay. Well, if
no,
you want to start with the physical,
yeah, start with the
yeah.
body.
Okay. Well, on the physical realm, the easiest, most reasonable explanation for the glaringly, dramatically ugly health statistics that we have. 6 out of 10 people today have a chronic health condition. 42% of us are obese. That doesn't even count. If it's overweight, it's about a third of us. Like just
Mm,
go to the airport, go to the mall, go to the beach, and see how many fit people you find. There's not many.
mm,
And that has to be coming from somewhere. So there's a dramatic increase. I found a picture of different hotels of like the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Nobody's overweight. What happened in the last 4 decades that has dramatically shifted? Well, one of the things that we can visibly see in our bodies is toxicity.
mm,
And that's just there's 80,000 synthetic chemicals that are new to nature that have been made in the last 100 plus years. And they don't have to be proven safe. They have to be proven unsafe, which is a really hard thing to do. So they kind of get a free
until it's
pass.
too late.
Right. And then even things that are banned decades later, we can still find them in our environment. So there's challenges that we have to honestly look at in we were lied to that we would have better living through chemistry, and that has poisoned and burdened our bodies. And it has not just poisoned us, but it has rebalanced it's shifted the microbiome. It has reshifted the microbial colonies that we interact with that should live in us and have a symbiotic relationship that's flourishing. And it's unbalanced them to such a degree that we can have bacterial and parasitic infections and other yeast and such that are highly problematic and toxic. And these things that should eat our food and poop nutrients now eat our food and poop toxins, and they're poisoning us on the regular.
Yeah.
And having some strategy to deal with that on the physical is one of the roots of illness, and often the biggest. And sometimes that's not even the biggest. And we have to start looking at other lanes in order to figure out how to get somebody well. So I can talk about them at length as well. But on the physical, that's what I've identified as the easiest, most obvious thing to fix.
Mm-hmm.
And if you just empower the body's purging systems, right? If you're an underslept, undernourished couch potato who doesn't drink water, we've got a problem. The exits aren't open. We can't get anything out of you.
Yes.
And so on the physical realm, we have to be able to address that first.
Well, I mean, it's something that while you were talking about that, is that something that scientists have been talking about for years, but no one talks about is the degradation of the soil. Healthy
Right.
soil
Yes.
breeds healthy food. The
Hmm.
worst culprits for degradation of soil is the US, which I think is like 70-80% is degraded soil, and Australia, which is like 60-70%. Other countries
Hmm.
around in Europe and other continents and whatnot have higher levels. Some, well, others have lower. I mean, but among the highest is the US and Australia. And
Yeah.
that's all down to intensive farming, which is unhealthy for the animals as well as for people. There's all kinds of overuse of the soil. There's not putting nutrients back into it. I mean, in years gone by, they used to do rotation of crops
Right. Yeah.
to not only to feed the plants, but also to put back nutrients into the soil. They don't do that.
Right.
It's just constant,
No.
constant, constant, so the soil just wears out.
Yeah.
So there's many things we've thought that's wrong with the food chain. And like you said, we
Yeah.
could go on forever about
Right.
the issues. But I mean, that's the principal thing. That's it's what's the soil, the quality of the soil, as well as the quality of the food, and what's
Hmm.
in the food chain with regard to feeding, the soil and the animals and etc. So,
Hmm.
okay, now if we look at mind, the part
Hmm.
of the mind. Now they say that 70 to 80% of what we die of, get sick and die from, is related to stress. I would put that at 100%, really, if you
And
think
right, you
about
could
it.
broaden your definition of stress. Yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I
Keep
mean,
going. You're
yeah,
doing great.
whatever level it comes from, but excessive, feelings of stress over a period of time
Mhm.
at whatever level it's occurring is going to create a problem. There was I think a study that was done look at on Wall Street. That's like the stress that comes from being sleep deprived. Sleep deprived
Hmm.
stockbrokers on Wall Street. It was
Oh
like
my God.
they're generally, most of them are men. They would make they would There are incidents of making bad decisions because they were sleep deprived and stressed, would go up to something like 70 to 80%. So most of the time they were making bad decisions.
Mm. I
I
don't
mean,
doubt that for a second. Right.
so I mean, just that the stress of not getting sufficient sleep is,
Hmm.
sets up a whole cascade of stresses, from work to
Hmm.
home to just walking down the street. That I remember somebody saying to me once that, a whole war started because somebody had got up out of the bed on the wrong side of the bed, because they yelled at that person who yelled at that person, and it just cascaded into and blew up into this whole big thing. And, it's true. I think that we're living in a very stressful world, and things we're likely to become stressed and upset and angry at the drop of a hat these days.
Hmm.
And we're not taught critical skills like conflict resolution or logic. And so the
Hmm.
first argument of choice is to get into a fight or worse. So what else do you see in terms of stresses on the mind? I mean, you have your daily stresses, the stress and strain of just standing up, right? Is a stress on the
Hmm.
body. But what other kinds of things that come to mind when we talk stress? Because it's such a broad word, can be applicable to so many things.
Yeah, sure. Well, when it comes to stress or when it comes to the mind, I guess recognizing what was helpful to me is that we are meaning-making machines. We cannot help but think in terms of story, and we tell ourselves story. And since none of us are God, we don't know everything. We can't fill every gap of every unknown factor that is relevant to our lives. And so we believe other people's stories, and it's kind of who tells the best story wins a lot of the time, which has its own implications for COVID. But let's just stick with the fact that we humans tell ourselves the person that cuts us off in traffic, and we can make up any number of stories as to what that person was doing or what they were thinking or what kind of character they have.
Mm.
And there's a good chance we're going to be wrong about that. And when we recognize that we often reason from unverified assumptions about life, and it's the unverified assumptions that can lead us to a storytelling that really isn't grounded in anything true. And the absence of truth in our ability to frame reality often creates these mental splinters. It creates these friction points where the story I'm telling myself doesn't line up with what I'm seeing, and now I'm frustrated. And it's the narrative lattice, if you will, the framework with which we hang the stories to fill the gaps of what we don't know, that then spills over into the emotional state that we end up with. And that storytelling, inevitably, since we can't separate thought, turns into emotion, positive or negative, or just more or less peaceful. And that reality of how we are wired to frame our lives through story, once we kind of get it that this is what I'm doing, there's an ability to step back and say, wait, do I really know that? Could I prove that? And one of
Mhm.
the ways that's been most helpful for me working with clients is to be able to kind of present the idea that logic and emotion work best when they're peers. When one can't dominate the other, And when we all kind of have this internal, like I've come to call it the prosecuting attorney and the defense attorney. And usually for most people, especially when they're in these loops of swirling anxiety or where they're hard on themselves, the prosecuting attorney is a mean bully who never has to actually defend the accusations he makes. He just gets to come rule the room like a bull in a china shop, bossing around and telling you stories and half truths and not and leaving out particular details. And when you can bring the defense attorney, like, hang on, okay, I'm willing to hear anything fair that you have to say, and I'm not perfect, so I can get better. But like, what were you expecting? I'm going to stay up all night and never get sleep, or that I was going to be perfect somehow. And you start to let a defense attorney grow a spine and have some muscle and get that sucker in shape. You start to let logic and the mind go to work cognitively on storytelling, on gap filling, on trying to bring word and give voice to emotion. And
Mhm.
that has been some of the deepest, funnest work I've been able to do with people over the years. So anyway, that's one thing I could say about that.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you say that because it's about for me, I find that working with clients, it's about being able to step back, get them to step back,
Hmm.
as exactly like
Yeah,
you were saying, step back from themselves slightly and be able to observe, become
right.
the interested observer of themselves, and that it can take discipline, but it can also there are also tools that can be used to help people to do that. One tool
Right.
that I use is vibrational essences because it helps you to learn what is me and what is not me. So you start to separate out those stories that that I was always told that such and such is true, and I've come to believe that. But I know now, because I've been able to step back from it and see it. Now I know that doesn't really resonate with me. That's not me. So
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, it's about whatever tool that is brought to bear. It's about being able to um, be able to observe oneself in a more objective fashion without without the blind spots, without the
Right. Well, and
the defense attorney going into overdrive. I mean,
yeah, where you're too defensive that you can't learn anything. Right.
yeah, exactly.
That's not healthy either. Yeah.
Right. So, and then we come to the level of the more ethereal part of ourselves, this more spiritual part of ourselves,
Hmm.
the part that lights the body when we're in it, and the body becomes empty when it's not there. So whether people believe that there's a spirit or not, there's something that that
Hmm.
separates from the body at some point. Now,
Hmm.
how is that when you work with your clients in that sense? What is it that
Hmm.
you look at or focus on?
Well, again, it does come back a lot to storytelling. So I can
Mm-hmm.
speak from a Christian frame because that's the one I know well, and that's where I operate from and how I kind of make meaning of the world. But
Mm-hmm.
essentially, the recognition that this whole grand adventure of life, this universe that we observe, came from somewhere. And if we don't have intellectually and emotionally satisfying answers to the biggest questions of our existence, where do we come from? What happens when we die? Who
Mm-hmm.
actually sets the standards for morals and ethics? And what is the nature of being human? Those are kind of at least four of the big heavy hitter questions when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to framing life through a spiritual frame.
Right.
And if there are, I don't think a spiritual frame has to just believe it. It doesn't make sense, but just trust it. Like, I think
Mm.
that's intellectually lazy. I think it does have underpinnings, and there will always be mystery in the spiritual realm, but it should actually have something that we could quantify and make sense of, and allow the best theories the world has ever come up with related to how to answer those. The
Mm.
best book I know of is actually called The Universe Next Door, which analyzes all major worldviews through a set of questions that every worldview has to try to answer. And it really does, um, when you can answer them in a satisfactory way, both intellectually and emotionally, it's like your soul can finally rest. And for me, I find that in the Christian perspective, and that yeah, I can take a deep breath and my soul is satisfied because I know I was made in the image of God, and that He says I'm worthy, and that's enough. And that my
Mm.
adequacy does not depend upon my ability to execute enough good things, hopefully, and squeeze them into a life, and therefore I
Mm.
can be accepted. And to me, if that doesn't mean somebody else has to agree with that to find more peace, but that to me is how I can rest, and it guides me, the idea of being made in the image of God. Well, what longings do we have that might be a reflection of his image? And it helps guide me to better questions
Mm.
and framing concepts of what reality really is, so that we can have some satisfactory answers to the big questions of our lives. And in that frame, kind of find rest for the soul. If to me, if I don't have a foundation like that, it's hard to build an answer to the so what questions or why bother questions. But when there is, and your soul's at peace, and then you see your life through the lens of purpose. And then now I'm a storyteller I'm a student of reality as best I am able, trying to go through this life, making sense of some of what I can see and can't see. That helps me um, at least find better questions to give people more peaceful, hopeful, flourishing lives.
Mm. Right. I mean, I think it's everyone has their own perspective. I mean, I also come from a Christian background, and it's part of
Mhm.
my life. It's part of who I am. But I also have many friends, family as well, that are, practice other religions or no
Mhm.
religion, perhaps.
Right.
And I think um, being a good human being doesn't necessarily hinge upon us practicing in a certain way or believing in a certain way, as long as I think, leaves them, it includes themselves and other people somehow in the equation in a beneficial way rather than, one-upmanship kind of attitude. So
Hmm.
I try to meet people where they are, and I think that is the most humanistic way of behaving. Just to be able to step outside of my own reality, perhaps for a time, and then to enter into theirs for a bit. And
Yeah, well, learning to see through other people's eyes can go a long way to like it's humbling to be able to fascinatedly ask questions and help understand where someone's coming from.
Mhm,
And when these kind of discussions can be framed in a learning mindset rather than a combative one, it really can, because yeah, at the end of the day, we're all human and we all long for the same things. I've never met anybody who doesn't crave justice or love or health. There's so many
mhm,
things we do share in common. And the more we focus on those, the kinder and more approachable it is to get to some of these spiritual, ethereal questions like you're talking about.
mhm. Wow. I said, now that we've solved all of the problems of the universe,
Didn't take long.
that's right. I just look at how we can address some of the issues. Not, of course, not all of them, but some of the issues
Mhm.
that we've looked at here. Starting again, going body, mind, spirit. I mean, what can we do, especially with people with limited budgets these days? And
Mhm.
that's what's driven in large part the epidemic of obesity. It's eating, and there's no doubt about this. Like, people have experimented on themselves and seen the difference that
Mhm.
fast food makes us. It's very fatty, high in fats, and it makes people gain weight. And it's the unfortunately it's of those who have the least amount of money who eat the most amount of fast food because it's cheap and cheerful and filling with
Yeah.
disastrous consequences. So I mean, yes, watching what we put in our mouths is
Mhm.
essential. And now, one thing that I was impressed by is that in our neighbor to the south here, the health of people were improved vastly. In fact, the um, what is it? What do they call it? The average lifespan for um, Cubans in Cuba, as in during the Castro years, was actually
Mhm.
slight is actually better than in the U.S. The longevity rates.
Yeah. I don't doubt that.
And but what one thing that was asked of people or mandated to the people was to use their terraces, use their balconies, use their backyards to grow food. And I've grown food on a patio using grow
Mm.
bags and whatnot. And there is nothing to me more satisfying as well as more healthy as being able to grow your own food, even if it's just salad greens.
Mhm.
Try to find innovative ways using hanging baskets for cherry tomatoes, whatever it is, to be
Mhm.
able to introduce healthier food, because like I said, the water has microplastics in it. We're full of microplastics. They don't even know what that's going to be doing to our health in future.
Hmm.
There's all kinds of heavy metals, all kinds of stuff in our food, in the earth. The earth itself is being depleted. So what we can do to kind of help the process is to perhaps turn things around a bit, is to grow something of our own, even if it's small, on a little piece of
Yeah.
patio. You can use grow bags. Works great. I grew potatoes that way.
Yeah. Well, you're right. There are so many, like, we have a humble garden in our own yard as well. And it's one of the easiest things you can do, theoretically. There's the logistics of it, but simple things you could do, I should say, is try to grow some of your own food.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they're expanding it beyond food. You can just look at the products you've used on the day to day, and so
Mm-hmm.
many of them are highly toxic. The shampoos and soaps and scented perfumes and candles, and there are so many ways toxins find their way to us. And it's just a drip of body burden across a lifestyle that can be as poisonous as anything. But if nothing else, get out of the tap water and at least get a basic filter. Like, that's one place you can diminish toxicity. And to your point about fast food, it is one of the most toxic things you could possibly consume. It's not the fat so much, it's the type of fat, and it's the
Mm-hmm.
type of toxic salt. So
Yeah.
put toxic fat and toxic salt in it. And the fact, I did an interview on my podcast with somebody named Zen Honeycutt, who pointed out, she works with moms across America. They studied fast food lunches, or fast food and school lunches, and found that the shocking level of heavy metal toxicity in those foods. And
Mm-hmm.
truthfully, you could test anybody's blood in the world, and they have pesticides and plastics and heavy metals in their bodies. It's just a question of, when does it become a burden?
Yeah.
So anything you can do to reduce that will go a long way. And sometimes, to me, just like you said, grow your own food, save some money, learn a new
Absolutely.
skill,
And so also have
and
spend time with your kids, because
right.
they loves doing
Yes.
stuff like that. So yeah,
Yeah.
the pluses on a lot of levels. So
Hmm.
okay, now if we look at the mind, I mean, there's all kinds of
Hmm.
things. There's these apps where to like calm, all kinds of apps that you can listen to help de-stress a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, Exercise. There's all the traditional things that people do to relax.
Hmm.
It's I'm laughing. I'm wearing a turtleneck today here in Florida, and it's like I usually like to swim, but it's just too chilly, and it's just like, oh man, that's my
Yeah.
exercise of choice. But I mean, whatever it is, I love to walk, and at this time of year,
Hmm.
it's great to walk because it's cool enough. So I mean, do find something that you love, dance, sing. I mean, whatever it is, but do the things that you enjoy. If you have to write it into your schedule, do that.
Hmm.
Block off
Yeah.
time, sleep late, another block, go to
Yeah.
gym, whatever it is. But it's important, that old saying that, a healthy mind and a healthy body. And
Hmm.
it's true. I mean, if the body is well, the mind picks up creates endorphins. If the mind
Hmm.
is calm, it has an effect on the body. So, I mean, again, we're not headless horsemen where the mind is divorced from the body. It's all one thing. So if you address the one and treat the one well, it will have an
Hmm.
impact on the other. But my avenue of choice with regard to being able to get people to tap into that more spiritual or ethereal side of themselves happens to be dreams. That's what I do.
Hmm.
That's my gift that I like to share with others. um, but it can also be using natural means such as aromatherapy or vibrational essences, which
Hmm.
help us to get people again to be able to step back a little bit, like we mentioned earlier, to step back from themselves a
Hmm.
little bit, to be
Hmm.
able to see with greater vision rather than that kind of narrow band that opens things out a bit so that they can see. So
Yeah.
that, I mean, there's this, like you said, there's a myriad things that people can do. But what are some of the things that you have come across that seem to work to address things of the spirit?
Well, I think part of life is just continual search for better principles and better ways of living and some sort of principle that informs a lot of behaviors. And one that's been helpful in this kind of the stress management lane, I'd highlight is the need that we have. And I don't use it's not want as much as it is a need. The need to play. It's a need for rest. It's respite, and that is different than sleep. And if we don't give ourselves permission to play or even permission to putter and not be on task and see how much productivity we can squeeze out of a given half hour or whatever.
Mm,
And a phrase that was helpful to me was that when you're resting, you're not wasting time, you're gathering strength. And if you think about the Jewish or Christian traditions of having a Sabbath rest, and there's France
mhm,
experimented with a 10-day work week and it blew up in their face. Like it's just too much. We
mhm,
need at some point to have to your a plan, a like I need to schedule my play. And if you can have an eye for what are restorative, non-self-sabotaging examples of play that I could have in my life. And play I kind of define by it's something that you inherently lose track of time. It's
mhm.
intrinsically interesting unto itself. It doesn't really contribute anything to the greater good of humanity. It's just fun. And
Right.
fun has its own value and virtue. And if there
Mm,
are respites of fun that you can seek out, and sometimes, like I've got 6 kids, so have a day off is I have to recalibrate and redefine what that even means. Like, they're hungry every day, and there's always need, and there's competing ideas of what we should do with the off day or whatever. And so there's philosophical things to work out. But if you can say the goal here is rest, and rest is for a reason. It's to recharge the battery so we can be on
okay.
mission and doing what it is we enjoy in life. That to
Mm,
me is a great stress management tool. And to your point, if you're not rested and you're toxic, or there's so many things that interrupt our sleep on the physical level, you don't even get the beautiful thing of remembering a dream or getting into a dream state because you're constantly in twilight and you never get there. So
yeah.
sometimes we have to solve that biological puzzle. Sometimes we have to just embrace a philosophy of rest and play before we can even get to the deep sleep that lets us open up other avenues of our well-being
Mhm.
and experience life on a different level as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm laughing because I think about sometimes the clients that I've worked with in the past, and I'm, giving them a massage, and it's like, relax. And they're like, I am relaxed. And it's like, and I let go of their arm and it just hangs there.
This looks relaxed to you.
I
You
mean,
seem sort of rigid.
but I mean, this is when people have created such a disconnect
Hmm.
between what they're feeling and what's going on in their bodies that I actually have to ground people into their bodies first so
Hmm.
that they're actually physically they're out in the ether somewhere. They're not really
Hmm.
engaging with their own bodies, and that's I think that became worse after the pandemic because we were online all the time, so we became these talking heads, haven't we?
Hmm.
Even
Yeah.
now, we're talking heads. But the difference being is that it was an unnatural state, and we've kind of continued with that tradition, but and not having gone back to interacting normally. So there's still a lot of stress responses around. People are much more
Hmm.
skittish because it's like, where's the next hit coming from? Almost.
Yeah.
So
Right.
yeah, there's a lot of fear and frustration, and that can only be reduced through inner work. And that's something that people are not always willing to do because involves actually taking a good look at themselves, and people
Hmm.
not always willing to do that. And that's just the
Right.
reality
Yeah.
of it.
Right. Well, you're overlapping with an important aspect in the identity realm because that is where a lot of our emotional or mental toxins come from, is who we think we are, and the storytelling we use to frame our identity then can become quite poisonous. And
Sure.
if we don't have something to say, no, I am worth the effort, or this does matter, or what story am I telling myself right now? Could I even prove that story's true? And maybe I'm actually reasoning from the frame of a hurt little 8-year-old or 10-year-old or teenager or wounded, whatever. And now I'm
Mm-hmm.
stuck in that headspace and I'm relying on the logic of an 8-year-old to create the rules I live by today. And we don't recognize we're doing that.
Oh,
then
yeah.
it becomes hard to shift out of those stress responses because we
Mhm.
have this yeah, but in the way.
Hmm.
And
Absolutely.
a simple question like, what is the story I'm telling myself? Is that
Yeah.
story actually true? Could I
Right.
prove it? What might be a different way to tell that story? What else might be going on in that memory? Can start
Yeah.
to shift everything.
Oh, let me tell you, I had an inner 5 year old that was kicking my butt for years. And
I bet.
why? Because at 5 years old, she wanted a new dress to take school pictures and we couldn't afford it. And she was upset. And
Yeah.
so what she decided was money was stupid and never let her have anything. And
Great idea.
that thought had dogged me for decades without realizing that foundational thought until I
Yeah.
worked with the coach. It's like it was just like, oh, it's me who's doing this to me. Okay. So
Yeah.
now, no,
That's
but now see, the inner 5 year old knows that money's really fun because we can do fun stuff with it and have chocolate and all kinds of good stuff. So,
yeah. Yeah. Once you get chocolate in the mix, everything is better.
oh, yeah. So, I mean, so I can really relate to what you're saying. I mean, it's where that sticking point in time along our timeline could be anywhere from pre-birth in some cases. I've
Hmm.
I've had
Yeah.
clients like that to somewhere where they were adults or maybe even older adults that things finally started to unravel and they needed to deal with it, or suffer consequences of various kinds, some more serious than others. So
Hmm.
yes, it really is about, as we keep saying, as getting to grips with oneself and getting to know oneself,
Hmm.
which can be in our exteriorly focused world, can be a difficult thing. We're always
Yeah.
projecting outward. So look, as long as it looks good on the outside and people find it acceptable, it's okay, no matter what's going on
Hmm.
the inside. And that makes actually having the ability to step back a bit difficult. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, two of the tools I find that the most dependably that help really shift the ability to look at those types of things are two virtues. It's humility and
Hmm.
curiosity. If
Right.
somebody can have those two things in enough measure, it's so much easier to engage a story and look at it more objectively rather than personally or get defensive. And so a question that might be helpful is how could I defend myself without getting defensive?
Hmm.
Or how could I play offense here without being offensive? How
Right.
can I advocate for what I'm trying to learn or understand? And if we can rest in my identity is not on the line here, who because so often I find people get sticky when who they are or how they're going to
Be
belong
perceived.
or not
Yeah.
belong, and
Mm.
it's based on perception. Once that isn't what we're talking about, and we're talking about the merits of the philosophy you developed because of a story, we're talking about that didn't happen because you were rotten. It happened because somebody else did a bad thing. And it's okay to separate bad action from your identity. And you don't have to be taking the blame and it's all your fault. And
Sure.
you don't have to defend indefensible things anymore. You can just kindly, humbly let them go and entertain, like, yeah, I've been living with that
Yeah,
for a
but
long time.
again, that takes inner work. It takes growth. I mean,
Hmm.
if
It does.
people aren't at that place where they can sit back and look at
Hmm.
something from with a bit of distance, which is why dreams are important, because dreams, when we're asleep, even though the brain is as active as when we're awake, are critical, um, blockages, the critical thinking in the prefrontal
Hmm.
cortex, which is the higher functioning, in terms of logic, are shut
Hmm.
down temporarily. They're short circuited so that, yes, the dream images may be fantastical and what have you, but there's a logic to them, and it's always about, this is something that's important to you, and the hypercritical functions, being that they're not active, it floats things up so that they don't have that emotional response to whatever it might be, that but gives you the opportunity to examine those things. It's like a little kite. Hey, take a look. This might be interesting
Hmm.
to you. Take a look at this. So I mean, and there's different ways to achieve that. Like I said, there's different ways that whether it be using aromatherapy oils or using vibrational essences or meditation, mindfulness, whatever the case may be, everybody has their own way of kind of getting into that um, alpha state
Hmm.
where their perception is a bit better and broader than it would be otherwise. So I think, like I said, we've managed to kind of sort the world and its problems now.
Yeah,
So
this was easier than I thought. Man, I've
yeah,
been trying
right.
to clean this mess up for decades. Yeah.
Yeah, right. But I thank you so much for sharing your story with us, as well as what you've learned over the years with regard to healing. That finding the roots of illness, however you manage to do that, at
Hmm.
whatever level you need to do that is important, because in the end,
Hmm.
who heals you is not the doctors, not the specialists, not even the surgeons who will happily cut you up and do things to you, but you yourself. And I mean, there's evidence of that. There was a man who was his body was riddled with cancer, and he was told, "Oh, there's nothing wrong with you. You're just fine," and he was fine, and the tumors actually shrunk. Then,
Wow. Yeah, I don't
somebody
doubt
went
that.
back and they said, oh, we made a mistake, and actually, you're actually riddled with cancer. I mean, that the man actually sickened and died. So our
Yeah.
minds are the most powerful weapon, and most powerful computer on the planet.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
we should actually use it a bit more,
Yeah.
I think.
It's a reason the medical world is befuddled by the placebo effect. They're like, how do we account for this? People have hope and they think themselves sick or they think themselves well. And
The
why don't we just
mind,
leverage that? Why don't we
exactly.
understand that in a way that helps us heal? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, they'll catch up with it with the ancient healing practices one day.
Yeah. More reluctantly, because you can't
Yeah,
turn it
I
into
know.
a pill and charge people way too much money for it. But
That's right. Exactly. Anyway, Christian, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our chat. And we will have to maybe it's in some months from now that kind of see where we are and have another chat and see what new insights we may have had since then.
well, sure. I thank you for having me on. It's been great being with you, and I'd be happy to come back.
Oh, thank you. You take care now. And thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. And if you have any questions you'd like to put to Christian, in fact, we'll have his details, contact details, with the post once it goes up. If you'd like to get some advice or assistance with healing your life and finding the root causes of illness, or you could get in contact with me and I'll be happy to help as well. Thanks again, and have a great rest of the day. Bye bye.